Good morning. For those of you who know TK, you know that I am not him. I am a longtime protege and colleague of TK's, now partner at the Conservation Studio in Somerville, Massachusetts, United States. So good morning, everyone. I am going to talk about the conservation and reproduction of historic wall coverings at the Frederick Law Olmsted site. Uh-oh, little help. I pressed the wrong button. Maybe I should get started. Well, if somebody could help me turn the projector back on. Oops. It seems so simple, but maybe not. Well, I can get started with my introduction. Fairsted, located in suburban Boston, is the home and working facility of the pioneering landscape architecture firm of Frederick Law Olmsted and Sons. Originally based in New York City, Olmsted relocated his practice to a 1810 Federal-style house in 1883. He renovated it as a family residence and to accommodate his busy professional office. The firm remained active at the site into the later 20th century, and in 1980, the National Park Service assumed stewardship of the house office with its extensive archives and grounds. A project to renovate the interiors was initiated in 2010, for which the original wallpapers from the period of interpretation were reproduced in 6 rooms. These included 5 distinct wall coverings generated by suppliers from 4 different countries using 4 methods of production: screen printing, embossed block printing, dyed linen burlap, and mixed furnish colored paper. This presentation will focus on the availability of samples for removal and reference, research into reproduction options, selection of suppliers, quality control during reproduction, and installation in collaboration with the seasoned paper hanger. The timeframes and costs involved will be shared for purposes of reference when wall covering reproduction projects of a similar scale are encountered, along with the strategies for the most authentic and efficient project execution, and some differences between working with entirely original historic wall coverings and reproductions.
I'm so sorry, Deborah, but we have to pause here for a second. We want to get that slideshow going. Just stick around, don't go anywhere. Just give us a few minutes. The good thing is we're running early.
So I think he took the So what am I supposed to press to move forward?
It's very important.
Yes.
Not hit the,
Okay.
It's not your fault.
Nobody told us.
No, it's idiotic.
Of course, it's right there, and I was thinking right, go for it. Okay, so this one.
Green is right and red is back.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, it's my fault. Okay, I think we're rolling again. Yep. Okay. So Frederick Law Olmsted is credited with the formal establishment of landscape architecture as a professional practice in America. He was born in 1822 and achieved renown for this design of Central Park, New York City. When his two sons joined the practice in 1883, he moved it to a Boston suburb where he purchased Fairsted, a gentleman's farm built in 1810. Olmsted had it altered by C. Howard Walker in a modest style of American aestheticism. The house served as a home, office, and drafting room until 1904, when the property was expanded to accommodate a large staff with improved spaces devoted to drafting, printing facilities, and an archive. The firm of Olmsted and Sons designed major works of landscape architecture throughout North America and survived until 1979, at which point the National Park Service created the Frederick Law Olmsted National Historic Site. The Park Service conservation efforts were initially focused on the preservation of the archives and the post-1904 working studio. The portion of the studio is seen on the right of the plan, in order to provide access to researchers and visitors. During this stage of work, the 1883 portion of the house on the left side of the plan had been repurposed as curatorial and facility offices. Following extensive research by the Park Service, a project was designed to repurpose this original portion as a formal exhibition area highlighting the Olmsted legacy. Even though the original wall coverings were documented within early photographs of Olmsted's working within these spaces, the wall coverings only survived in these 6 rooms as isolated fragments or remnants under moldings, as shown here. The wall coverings included a block-printed floral design in blue in the sitting room, a similar pattern in green in the hall and closet, a plain colored paper in the north parlor, which served as the drafting room, a rust-colored fabric in the entry, and a block-printed embossed pattern in the library, which also served as the office. The subject of this presentation is the decision-making process and execution of salvage, reproduction, and reinstallation of these 5 different wall coverings. As architectural and paper conservators have come to understand, the conservation of historic wall coverings has become a specialty unto itself within our many areas of professional focus. Generating film material can take the form of in-painting, printing film material, or digital reproductions for larger sections to blend with the adjacent original surfaces. Finally, the use of custom or off-the-shelf accurate reproductions can be an option to replace original wall coverings when conservation is cost prohibitive, felt to be insufficient to address the compromises in condition or appearance, or, as in this case, to replace originals for which there is physical evidence of what was lost. Now, you may ask, why should a conservator be involved in this process when there are curators familiar with historic furnishings, firms that produce or sell accurate historic wall coverings, and specialist wall covering hangers? The reasons we would propose are, first, that the documentation has to be tailored to the project as both a record and a prescriptive proposal. This will include identification of the wall coverings found, their method of printing, number of colors, etc., measured plans and room elevations to identify sample locations, calculate quantities needed, and guide reinstallation. Second, conservation treatments are essential. Samples have to be removed, surface cleaned, and washed as possible to reveal the most accurate colors. mended for handling, and flattened for use as references and eventually as archival records. Third is engagement in the reproduction process. This reflects a crucial element of how conservators with experience with historic wall coverings can be particularly helpful. Conservators bring knowledge of production resources and connoisseurship of the methods of original production, allowing us to counsel clients as to where compromises may be possible, tolerable, or unacceptable. Let's begin with the library. In many respects, of the 5 reproductions commissioned, the library was the most technically complicated one. The original relief design included metallic ink and an embossed weave pattern on a textured paper. Following removal and conservation of all original panels, we identified underlaps that revealed the least compromised original colors and cross-referenced those with color swatches. Any number of color systems are available for reference, such as Pantone or Munsell, or in this case, commercially available paint swatches. The paint swatches were sent to the printer with an original, full repeat of the printed design for reference. The trial printings were then reviewed, and areas of color and design inaccuracy were directly identified on the trials and returned to the printer. This could involve more than one sequence of reviews, but in our experience, this is not considered burdensome for the printer, as they are equally interested in the best possible product. Finally, the relief printing took place using mineral pigments in a glue binder, and those proofs were also reviewed for accuracy. Atelier Dauphard in Tours, France, was engaged for their particular specialty in the production of low and high relief wall coverings, which the Park Service thought warranted the extra attention and cost associated with this process. The wall coverings for the sitting room, hall, and closet were similar floral designs in 2 different colorways. While the originals were also block printed, these reproductions were screen printed as a cost-saving measure by David Skinner in Dublin, Ireland. The media were Sericol screen printing inks and Aro pigment concentrates, mixed with an acrylic emulsion and distemper-like paint to produce a matte appearance on 140-gram machine-made paper. Extra bottles of the 4 colors were also requested to tone the edges following trimming and for retouching if needed. The plain colored paper used in the North Parlor drafting room was selected specifically by the Olmsteds to serve as a neutral background for display of their working plans. While plain colored papers have a long tradition of use since the 18th century, the paper used here was manufactured from colored pulp rather than rolls coated overall with a colored ground layer. The machine production of this paper was a straightforward process using a combination of colored cotton rag furnish, internally sized with Hercon 80 commercial cornstarch. The papermakers of Papeterie Saint Armand in Montreal, Canada, were so careful in their in-house trials that the first sample sent was approved. For production of the rust-colored fabric in the entry hall, we were referred by a textile conservator to Thistle Hill Weavers, New York. The fabric was reproduced using linen yarn, dyed with a direct dye color, and woven on a circa 1900 loom in 54-inch wide and 51-yard long bolts. The fabric was finished by mending and burling. Tests were conducted to confirm that thorough wetting would not alter the dye color, and the fabric was lined in our studio with heavyweight machine-made Kozo paper and wheat starch paste to facilitate application to the walls. Of course, all 5 of the wall coverings for use in the 6 rooms were reviewed by the client. Note that 2.5 times the quantity of each wall covering was ordered, both for the extra needed for any installation and so that each room could be replaced in the future when necessary. The original wall covering samples that were salvaged and conserved were placed in the site archives. We're very familiar with the reinstallation of historic wall coverings that we've conserved in our own studio, but the installation of full rooms of reproduction wallpapers involves somewhat different processes and materials. So we worked with a professional paper hanger, both to reduce costs and to take advantage of their technical expertise and specialized equipment. That said, we specified or approved all materials and processes and participated in the installation, making all decisions about pattern placement, seam locations, and correction. The National Park Service staff made all necessary repairs to the plaster on lath walls. For reversibility and to mitigate any imperfections, the walls were covered with medium-weight muslin and a layer of machine-made lining paper, Arrowsmith 150, using commercially prepared wheat starch paste due to the quantities needed. Note that beforehand the fabric was machine washed and dried and the plaster was sized to prevent too rapid absorption of the adhesive. The wall coverings were trimmed for historically appropriate butt joining of the rolls, and the exposed edges were toned, as it is considerably more difficult to in-paint glaring white edges after installation. The rooms were orthogonally plotted using a laser to identify areas where vertical and perpendicular adjustments relative to the surrounding moldings were necessary, and to identify preferred seam locations. The wall coverings rolls were pasted by machine and by hand. The walls were pasted with rollers and brushes. The wall coverings were positioned and contact was reinforced with both plastic spatulas to remove air bubbles and newsprint to absorb any extra adhesive. Upon drying, the extra was trimmed, and in fact there were occasional small gaps which needed retouching using the media provided. So let's look back and consider what we encountered at the beginning of the project and compare that with the appearance of the rooms following installation of the new wall coverings and exhibition material, and review costs and the duration of each phase of the project. The project was organized in 2010 and was completed 1 year later, so current costs would of course be higher. Nevertheless, the cost of reproduction is generally broken down by fixed costs for artwork and the number of colors, which determines how many screen or relief blocks are needed. Variable costs include the number of trial printings and the final production costs on a per-roll basis for the quantities needed. For the 2-color screen-printed wallpapers by David Skinner, fixed costs were $1,600 and production costs were $158 per roll, approximately $6 per square foot. The 7-color relief printed and embossed wallpaper by Atelier Dauphard used in the library had fixed costs of $6,000 and production costs of $890 per roll, approximately $38 per square foot. The colored paper used in the North Parlor by Papeterie Saint Armand cost $66 per roll, approximately $1.25 per square foot. And the custom-dyed linen burlap used in the entry hall cost $78 per 54-inch wide yard and was produced in 2 rolls at a cost just shy of $6 per square foot. The time spent on project design, sample removal and conservation, generating the reproductions, wall preparation, installation, and final documentation was 919 hours, plus a total reproduction cost of $39,000 to cover 4,252 square feet of wall area, approximating $45 per square foot. But please remember 2 aspects of this project. Each room had only 1 wall covering to reproduce, no borders, no dados, no ceiling papers, and enough was printed to enable complete replacement in the future. So before wrapping up, just let me mention a few additional options that may arise when reproductions are needed. Hand-painted reproductions, particularly for Chinese export wall coverings on paper and silk, are available by firms like De Gournay or Allison McDermott. Embossed Japanese leather paper, a craft revived by Takasha Ueda, and is now reproduced by the Kinkara Kami Institute. And finally, digital scanning and printing, either as fill material or replacement if conservation isn't feasible. We've been using digital reproductions since 2008, and the progress made by specialist firms in image capture, manipulation to remove compromises, archival support options, and printing technology is extraordinarily impressive. It is particularly applicable to any room where the patina of exposure and wear is critical for an authentic appearance, particularly if the historic painted finishes are conserved, but where conservation of the original wall coverings is only partially achievable. There will always be a need for reproduction via relief and screen printing, but the particulars of digital production are a very worthwhile subject for a presentation unto itself. In summary, what merited bringing this project to your attention and what contributed to its successful execution? First of all, the National Park Service had done all the necessary detective work to locate the samples and research to determine what was significant about the site that should guide its interpretation and architectural conservation. They were a sophisticated institutional client with access to specialists that could evaluate options and participate in the decision-making process. When a client has fewer resources, the conservator contractor for a similar project would have to either have a comparable level of experience or access to a network of those who do. This was still the case when it came to researching who could best address the very different particulars of reproducing the 5 different wall coverings, and we relied on our colleagues for reference. We hope that this presentation has served the same function for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. And I have to say thank you for going so smoothly through everything and the little hiccup in the beginning. Apologies. This was a wonderful presentation, and thank you for sharing, especially details about costs and the project, how it came together. Do we have any questions for Deborah?
Sorry, I always ask questions. Frank Mowry again. Deborah,
Yes.
At what point does Studio TKM choose to restore a wallpaper? I know it's far more expensive in many ways because of the labor, as opposed to reproduction. And did you all have the consideration to say, do one part of a wall, restore it into using its original paper, and reproduce the rest of it? Just curious as to where the decision comes in to reproduce or restore.
Yeah, that's a very important consideration that comes into the decision-making process very early. In this particular project, the remnants were so few and in such discrete areas that restoration and display of originals was not really an option. There was no single wall of wallpaper remaining. They were only very small fragments. But there are other instances, certainly, where portions of or entire rooms of wallpaper are conserved on site or restored in our studio. And mostly that comes down to the intentions of the client. It also, the reason we showed budgeting information was because budget very often factors into it as well. So there are options running the entire gamut from conserving the entire room to repair, restoration, or reproduction or replacement. And there's no one-size-fits-all decision-making model.
I saw a hand up before.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yes. Leah Michal from the Technical University Cologne. I was wondering whether you knew if there were any other fragments or fragments from other layers remaining, or if there was just like this one layer of wall coverings that survived.
So there were remnants of other papers in some of the rooms, but in this particular instance, there were photographic documents photographs within the archives that documented exactly which papers were on the wall during Olmsted's time. Pictures show him in the library space with the backdrop of his bookcases and wallpaper. They also show him in his drafting room. So we had from archival evidence, we could identify and place fragments within their time frame in the history of the house. So yes, sometimes there is a layering. In this case, we were fortunate enough to have supporting archival evidence which told us which layer was the layer most appropriate for the period of interpretation of the house and the space.